Welcome to Spaulding Ridge's demo of Anaplan Optimizer and Crisis Demand Planning in Supply Chain. My name is Kait Chura, and with my colleague Joe Masoero, we are going to show you the value in using Anaplan Optimizer to help enhance your Anaplan model to accommodate for changes in your supply chain.
Today we are going to discuss Anaplan Optimizer in the context of a production scenario planning tool for supply chain professionals. During times of uncertainty, customer demand can drastically change. Having a tool that can help facilitate any adjustments that need to be made to a production plan is imperative for any supply chain team. Looking at this dashboard, it would be an executive level summary of all the costs associated with that production model. Starting with the demand, we have the ability to see the costs associated with plant production, vendor optimization and raw material costs, the plant distribution logistics, as well as the allocation from the distribution center to the stores. All the totals are summarized up here so we can understand our starting point for our optimizer tool. Below, we have a notes section, so if anything were to go offline or be unplanned, it could be documented. This view allows someone who is more of an executive level to know the steps that are currently being taken to address the new customer demand. We are going to start by going into our plant production dashboard. The objective of our plant production cost optimizer is to take the inputs and return the optimal number of hand sanitizer bottles to be produced at each plant, along with the optimal number of labor hours it will take to make that production. Starting with our demand, we have the ability to see a few things that can be modified. First, we need to know all of the plants that are currently able to produce that finished good, which is bottles of hand sanitizer. We need to know the cost of labor per hour, as well as the plant capacity hours for labor. And then we also need to take into consideration the production costs and run rates. Anything here that is currently selectable or modifiable can also be connected with calculations that are done on other S&OP models. We're going to run our optimizer now, but we won't see any changes because it's currently already optimized to be able to meet those 40,000 units. We can see our production costs and our labor costs here, as well as knowing how many of our production hours we need per plant to be able to create those 40,000 units. But what were to happen if we didn't need to make 40,000 bottles of hand sanitizer, but instead we needed to make 80,000 bottles of hand sanitizer, like we are seeing right now when it comes to our demand fluctuating greatly? At 80,000 bottles of hand sanitizer, we can see our demand change, but our plan hasn't changed. We're still seeing the same production cost as well as the production quantity. If we were to optimize though, we've already put in the constraints necessary for us to calculate how that can be taken into consideration. So what we'll see here is that while Brazil and China continue to produce, because they have a capacity of how much production they can make, we see Vietnam come on board, as well as Mexico, because those are the most cost-effective alternatives for us to meet that new demand. But just to complicate things further, what happens if China is no longer able to produce? We've seen it on both of our scenarios we've gone through so far, and it's one of our primary production locations. Can we still meet our demand? We can run our optimizer and see if it's still possible. Turns out that we can. Because Spain is able to take on some of that burden and Mexico is able to operate at full capacity, the demand is able to still be met of those 80,000 units. This might be a good opportunity for us to add a note saying China is no longer open. And that way, if some sort of executive were to look at that main dashboard, they would be able to know, why has our production cost increased? Not only do they know that the demand changed because that was already shown on the previous dashboard, but this gives an idea of why is our expense so much higher than we'd expect to see. We can submit that production plan, and then we can know that other teams are going to go into effect and use their sections at that point. I'm going to go back to the previous page so we can kind of see some of those changes go into effect, but we probably won't do this for the remainder of the demo. On this executive level dashboard, we can see China is no longer open and that production plan has been submitted. Other teams would want to make sure that their production plan was submitted, so that way they aren't moving their parts before the production plan is already submitted. Think about it. A raw material cost from a vendor, if that gets shipped to China, that's a lot of material that is sent to not be received. And our distribution center can't be receiving goods from China if China is not sending any. We are going to follow this by going into our vendor optimization tool. On this dashboard, we primarily favor a lean, cost-effective strategy when it comes to providing all the moving pieces that are required to make a finished good. However, on this dashboard, we also have the ability to compare that with the lead time required to meet that, send the product from the vendor to the plant to meet the demand. As we can see, we still see those 80,000 units, and we have all of our vendors currently online. Similar to the plants, we will also discuss at one point what happens when a vendor goes offline. But let's make sure we know where our starting point is first. We have the price per SKU associated with all the parts that go into the build of materials for that finished good. And we have our starting lead time. If we look down here, what's interesting is that because we've already optimized that production plan, it's actually already taken China offline. So China is not expected to supply any of these products to, or is not expected to receive any of these products from the vendors. If we were just trying to meet that 80,000 units, this would already be optimized. However, because we want to complicate things further, we are going to actually change this. So one of the primary vendors, if we look here, these are the ones that are prioritized. We're going to take vendor 5 offline because vendor 5 is used not only in our cost-effective strategy, but also in our leads time-sensitive strategy. So if I go in here, and I can remove all of them pretty easily using our Anaplan tools, we can optimize the vendor to plant to do both cost-effective as well as lead time-sensitive. We run these processes, and at that point, we see all of our changing, both of our strategies change. Not only is it more cost-effective to use other vendors, including vendor 1 and 2, but it's also sometimes one of the faster options if we are trying to supply the need that is at each location. Obviously, this kind of a comparison needs to have some sort of discussion around the variance associated with the cost before a decision is made. We don't necessarily always want to lead towards the fastest route. Sometimes we do need to take into consideration the cost-effective might be more important. But for this demo, we have taken into consideration that because this is time sensitive, we are actually going to use the faster method of facilitating that demand. I might add that here, faster method of supply, and I'm going to submit this vendor plan. We can go to our plant distribution center next, but I'm going to really quickly, before I do that, I got a little bit ahead of myself. I'm going to go back to that production scenario planning. And because this doesn't automatically change, I'm going to change this to say shortest lead time. So that way we can see that change in total vendor cost distributed into our total vendor cost that we see up here. Next, we are going to discuss the plant to distribution center. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague.
All right, so the next step of our production scenario planning model is the plant to distribution center distribution. The objective of this model is to minimize the cost of transporting goods from plants to distribution centers, given that the demand at each store, the max supply at each DC, and the cost of transportation. At the top, you'll first see whether our DCs are operational and our 3 methods of transit that we will use to distribute our product. If we continue to scroll down, you will see our inputted items. First, you have plant cost per pallet. DC capacity, as well as plant capacity information, and then all of our costs. First, our air and our water costs from plant to our east, central, and west distribution centers, as well as our freight costs from Mexico to each of our distribution centers. So if we continue to scroll down, what we will see is our original plan with China online. Now, if we run our optimization one more time, what you can see is our new plan. On the left, we have our East Distribution Center, which is being filled with water shipments from Spain. Our Central Distribution Center chose to get their water shipments from Brazil, while our Western Distribution Center optimized their shipments from Vietnam, as well as freight from Mexico. So in our current scenario, we have decided that we are going to prioritize lead time over cost. So if we can scroll back up, we decided we are going to only do air shipments for our goods. This is due to the current situation going on. Our executive team has told us that is what we're going to try to optimize. So if we scroll back down and run it again, what we will now see is the optimizer has chosen the optimal way to distribute the goods to the distribution centers, but only if it can be via air. So as you can see on our East Distribution Center, Spain is flying in all of the goods, as well as the Central Distribution Center is getting everything from Brazil. And then the Western Distribution Center splits its shipments between Mexico as well as Vietnam. And if you keep scrolling down, what you will be able to see is that cost information along with the plant shipment quantities. It all adding up to that 80,000. So in our notes, we may want to add that method of transportation available is air only. All right, so we can then submit that plan. All right, so we're going to keep moving along in our process here. And our next step is now we have those 80,000 units of supply available in our different plants. So our next step is to do that allocation of supply to the operational stores to meet the expected demand of our hand sanitizer. So as the model is currently working, at the top, you will see our supply is right there, and then our 6 stores that we, in a normal scenario, are going to try to allocate to. So if we continue to scroll down, what you'll see is their demand, as well as costing information. We have our DC cost per unit, just our general fixed costs for each distribution center, as well as our costs to get from our DC to our stores. So if you continue to scroll down, what you'll see is a pretty standard distribution that we have based off of all of our stores being open and no sort of scenario happening. So if we want to scroll back up to the top, in our scenario, we currently have 2 stores that have closed their doors. So we will uncheck store 1 and store 3. And as you can see in our store demand table, we have reallocated our supply to get to the stores, not including 1 and 3. But what we need to do now is rerun our optimizer to make sure that we optimize based on cost to reallocate. So we'll run that process now. And as you can see, our allocation has changed quite a bit, and our store 1 and our store 3 can be seen at the bottom as having no supply filling them. And now it's only allocating out supply to the stores that we have online. So now we can just add a note that supply has been reallocated to account for closed stores. All right, so we can just submit our plan right there. So now we can hop back to our Launchpad. And what we'll be able to see in the top right of our dashboard is our total costs now changed to show the different scenarios that we went through today. The last thing we wanted to talk about was our Master Optimizer button that is here in the middle of the dashboard. This button has the ability to go through all 4 of the scenarios that we just went through and actually make sure to account for any sort of boxes we may have unchecked, as well as inputs that we may have changed along the way. So to demonstrate that, what we can do is change the demand from 80,000 to 100,000. Run that master optimizer and rerun that same exact scenario that we just created with the China plant down, with transportation options only being air, as well as some of our stores being down and our vendors being unchecked. And as you can see on the top right, we had a change in our cost go up to $40 million. Thank you for watching the Spaulding Ridge demo on the Anaplan Optimizer within supply chain planning. Please feel free to reach out to Kate or myself via the contact information shown here. And if you want to learn more about the Anaplan Optimizer or Spaulding Ridge, feel free to visit the links provided. Thanks and have a great day.